Joseph Smith's sixth plural wife was Agnes Coolbrith. Without knowing it, Agnes's story is the one I taught as a missionary, in that Joseph would marry widows so that he could take care of them. However, this case of a Levirate marriage happened only 4 times, in the 35 to 40 times he took a wife.
Agnes was born in May, on July 9, 1818. She was the third of 8 children. In 1832, at the age of 23, she was boarding with an Augusta Cobb in Boston. Augusta contained a Book of Mormon, and Agnes came to believe in it.
Todd Compton actually suspects that Agnes and her friend sent to Kirtland 4 missionaries to come and teach them.
Orson Hyde and Samuel Smith both came to Boston, and Agnes was baptized into the church on July 30th. Compton also made an interesting remark when he said concerning Pratt and Smith's mission to Boston. If there were any male converts in Boston, they were not mentioned.
Ew.
After their baptism, Agnes and her friend Mary left Boston and joined the Saints in Ohio. They boarded with Father Smith and Mother Smith.
Agnes, who was 27, and Don Carlos, who was 19, were married July 30th of 1835. Don Carlos served 2 missions, and during this time they had 2 children. Don Carlos's second mission was to help the Saints raise money so that they could leave Missouri. Missouri proved a very hostile place for the Mormons. And as a Missourian, I apologize.
Todd Compton tells that on October 18th at 10:30 p.m., a mob approached Agnes's house after sunset, turned her out, looted it, and then burned it to the ground. Gathering her 2-year-old, also named Agnes, and her 6-month-old, Sophronia, in her arms, she fled in terror through 3-inch deep snow. After running 3 miles, she waded waist-deep through the icy Grand River. They found safety on the other side at the home of Lyman White.
Don Carlos appears to have loved his wife and children deeply. Letters tell us that he was often worried for them. In one of his letters, he wrote Agnes a poem, in which he called her the choice of youth, Agnes my bride, his pearl of price and his precious jewel, and even the richest prize.
In one of his letters, he sent her money and was concerned about her health. He said, "You are entwined around my heart with ties that are stronger than death, and time cannot sever them."
There are mixed accounts of whether Don Carlos actually accepted polygamy. According to some sources, Don Carlos adamantly opposed polygamy.
Ebenezer Robinson remembers him saying, "Any man who will teach and practice the doctrine of spiritual wifery will go to hell. I don't care if it is my brother Joseph." Robinson also wrote that Don Carlos was one of the most perfect men I ever knew, but that he was a bitter opposer of the spiritual wife doctrine, which was talked quite freely in private circles in his lifetime. Their daughter Ina, born Josephine in 1841, later reported that her dad quietly made plans to go back to Kirtland in 1842, and was only prevented by his death. Evidently, his stance on spiritual wifery caused a lot of tension in the Smith family.
Ina's first cousin, Joseph F. Smith, was firm in his opinion that Don Carlos actually supported polygamy. He and Ina never saw eye to eye on this topic. One day, while working in a damp printing cellar, Don Carlos caught sick. He passed away on August 7th of 1841. He was only 25 years old. According to Ina, who was just 5 months old at the time, so she would have no memory of this actually happening, Don Carlos made one final request of Joseph Smith. "Joseph," he said, "I want you for the rest of your life to be an honest man." Yet her cousin Joseph F. Smith, who was only 2 years old at this time, called this story contemptible in its fallacy.
And in the Temple Lot case in 1893, Mary Ann Sheffield gave testimony that Agnes did indeed become Joseph Smith's plural wife. It was also reported that her husband said she wished her to marry Joseph, and she did so. On January 6, 1842, 5 months after Don Carlos's death, Brigham Young wrote a journal entry in Masonic code which reads, "I was taken into the lodge. J. Smith was Agnes's."
Was is probably code for wedded and sealed.
In Joseph Smith's own journal for this day, written by a scribe, it reads, "Truly this is a day long to be remembered by the saints of the last days, a day in which the God of heaven has begun to restore the ancient order of his kingdom unto his servants and his people, a day in which all things are concurring together to bring about the completion of the fullness of the gospel."
After the death of Joseph Smith, Agnes was married to Don Carlos's cousin, George Albert Smith. However, after the Saints moved to Utah, Agnes seems to have just been left behind. A theme in Agnes's life is that of being abandoned. With the unfortunate deaths of Joseph Smith and Don Carlos, she was abandoned by her first and second husbands. And with George Albert moving to Utah without her, she was abandoned by her third husband. In the spring of 1847, Agnes found a fourth husband, who unfortunately was an alcoholic, who abandoned her multiple times until he finally left her and the kids in 1870 in California. In a letter to Joseph F. Smith, Agnes wrote, "I could say more things to you, Joseph, that I know, and that has been told me by those that are dead and gone, but perhaps you would not believe me. No, I know that you would not, so it is best for me to keep silent." In 1876, David and Alexander Smith, both sons of Joseph Smith, and both part of the anti-polygamy, reorganized Latter-day Saint Church, came and visited their Aunt Agnes. They certainly had no idea that Agnes had been a plural wife to their father.
According to Lucy Walker, Agnes told them that what they had seen and heard in Salt Lake was truth, and that those women were their father's wives, and it was useless to promulgate falsehoods to the world, and advised them to desist.
David was struck dumb, and Alexander said he would not take anybody's word, not even his Aunt Agnes's.